I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Joynton. He's going to give a 20-minute presentation on a question that the board has posed for him to answer for you today, and then we're going to finish the hour out with the questions and answers. I'm not going to give him much of an introduction. He can introduce himself if he wishes, but you've all received in GRCC today a lot of information about all candidates. But I'd like to introduce at this time Dr. Olin Joynton. Dr. Joynton is president of Alpena Community College, and I will read for you the question that the board has asked him to respond to. GRCC, Michigan's oldest two-year college, has received state and national acclaim. We have been designated an AQUIP Vanguard College and have earned the distinction of a Michigan Quality Award winner. We are a candidate for the prestigious Malcolm Baldrige Award. We are clearly strategically poised as a vital college involved in a community that holds promise for the state of Michigan. In a 20-minute presentation, please convey how your leadership can inspire continuous quality improvement, create a community of high-level learners necessary to meet the needs of West Michigan, and be a catalyst for economic recovery in the state. How will you promote employee engagement in this process? Dr. Joynton.
Well, thank you very much, Donna, and welcome everybody to this afternoon. That sounded like 4 questions to me. That's what I'd prepared for, so maybe one big, great one. But first of all, I want to commend GRCC for having this kind of community forum. There was a similar occasion in Alpena when I competed for the presidency there. I think it's a great way for the college to send a message to the community that everybody's welcome to have a part in the process of selecting GRCC's next leader. And I did read the Grand Rapids Press article commending you for that step of openness, and you know, that's the kind of atmosphere that I'd really like to work in. Well, everybody today has been asking me, especially as the day goes on, well, how are you doing, Olin? Being ready to prop me up. And these days are designed to see whether the candidate has the stamina to perform the job, I think. But the compensating factor is how energizing it has been for me to meet the people here, the students, the faculty, the staff, to see the great things that you're doing, the facilities, to the meticulous condition in which they're kept, and the improvements that you're making, and the hospitality, receptiveness. It's extremely important. Facilities convey a message, and yours convey a message of respect, of welcome, of being set up to do the business of the college in the most efficient and productive and indeed uplifting way. That's what I look for in a good physical plan, and you certainly got it figured out here. And advancing more every day, so congratulations. Just some of you may have seen this stuff about me, but just a brief introduction of my background. My father was a career naval officer, joined the service in World War II and liked it. My mother was an English teacher. As we followed around to different assignments, I think she went to a total of 7 different universities, colleges and universities, transferring the credits, as many of our students do, from place to place until she was able to finish her degree when I was maybe 12 years old and starting her career. And you can see somebody brought up with parents dedicated to these career goals could not escape a strong dose of honor, discipline, and service. And so that's what my brothers and I got as we were growing up. People ask me where I'm from, and I have to say I don't know. I was born in Key West, Florida, and moved about 15 times before I graduated from high school, including 3 times in my junior year. And so, what a life. 3 years overseas in Oslo, Norway, during the late 1950s. The Cold War was going on full scale. It was my father's job to, along with other NATO personnel, to listen to the Soviets to see whether they were about to launch the missiles in our direction. And so that bit of geographic diversity has been helpful. I found, you would find in my character trait as a result of all those moves, and that I love change. I'm very comfortable with it. I am skilled, and I appreciate meeting new people. I can come into a new situation and dive in, and that's what I'd hope to be able to do here. My wife Patricia and I celebrated last week our 25th wedding anniversary. We have 4 children. 2 of them are in Houston, where I worked for a long time and where we met. One's a truck driver. Our son is a truck driver and truck mechanic for what we call a hotshot firm down there. Rapid delivery of often oil field parts. When something breaks down out there in the field or industrial site, he gets a call at 2 or 3 a.m. and get out to Kansas or Calgary or someplace like that as soon as you can with this piece of equipment, because the company's losing $10,000, $20,000 an hour without that part. And so very proud of him. Daughter Stephanie is a architect in Houston, graduate of Texas A&M University, and recently, 3 years ago, went out on her own with a partner to start her own firm. So she's learning entrepreneurship as well as the architectural skill. Our middle daughter, Lauren, is living with Pat and me in Alpena and has signed up to start the ACC CAD program in the fall. Youngest daughter, Natalie, is the creative one. She's been interested in creative writing ever since before she could write. She would dictate stories to my wife, and she's will start her second year as a creative writing MFA student at Purdue University, where my wife is delivering her today while I meet all of you and get to know GRCC. My introduction to community college work was as an instructor. I was finishing up my dissertation at Rice University in the field of philosophy, and I got a call from a associate dean at a startup community college for the northern suburbs of Houston. They didn't even have a campus built up yet, but we met in the high school after the high school students had gone away, and I walked into a classroom, an evening class, and it was my first really introduction to community college work. The diversity of students, the breadth of experience that they brought to the situation was truly an eye-opener for me. And I decided very quickly that instead of engaging in narrow research that nobody else could understand except a dozen other people in the field, and shutting my door to students, as is required for a professor at a research university, community college work was something I fell in love with because of the outreach, the way in which we're able to do so much good for so many people by offering opportunity for enrichment and advancement of people's lives, many of whom would not have any other choices. That is just something that I learned very quickly. In fact, I had some concern because there I was, 25 years old, and these people with these rich experiences with family and work all over the world, I'm supposed to teach them the meaning of life. Golly, I can learn a lot from them. And I think any faculty member, staff member at community college will find that learning is reciprocal, especially in a community college environment. I think the awe and admiration, though, also that we have is significant. If I had to face the obstacles of some of our students as they succeed so well with very complicated child care arrangements or work responsibilities or personal commitments, oftentimes with disabilities or illnesses, I'm just awestruck. I mean, I talk about giving respect to people who deserve it. That's one of our greatest experiences in community college work, to recognize people for what they're doing, their ability to persevere and achieve their goals against great odds. So that's very inspiring. Was a full-time faculty member for 20 years and eventually found myself lured into bigger and bigger committee assignments and doing more things for which I got release time that looked administrative, and I finally woke up and said, golly, I'm acting like an administrator more and more, and maybe it's time for me to go over to the dark side. And part of that, too, that transition for me was initially, like many faculty members, being suspicious of administrators and wondering whether they were out to do faculty any good, to meeting a few who were truly inspiring and ethical, and had a lot of integrity and vision and energy. And so eventually we learn about what our possibilities might be that we never dreamed of when we start out in life. And the idea of doing that kind of work became increasingly appealing to me. That is, by the way, one of our main roles with our students, as you well know. The mission of GRCC, as you know, is to provide learning opportunities that enable people to fulfill their goals. Okay, but the coda that has to be added to that is you don't just take people's goals as they are. We have an awful lot of people coming to community colleges whose goals are frankly too small, and they haven't had the right kind of nurturing environment to dream of their own best possibilities. So achieving their goals is not just taking what they say their goals are at face value, it's helping them to grow their goals and giving them successful experiences that make their goals grow bigger and bigger and bigger. The person who comes on our campus and all he or she wants to be is a licensed practical nurse, but then some success on the RN and maybe a nurse practitioner, maybe even a physician. That kind of stuff happens every day on community colleges. Again, tremendously inspiring to me. So I took a role as chief academic officer in the college district that by that time had grown to about 30,000 students from small beginnings in the mid-70s and is now about 45,000 students. That was a very interesting experience too, close to the heart of learning. Interaction with faculty was a big part of that, but the new parts were working with the president closely, factoring in budgets and facilities into the broader picture. And that's what one of the things I enjoy most about being a president actually relates back to the subject of philosophy, the big picture. All the different parts that it takes to make a successful enterprise truly fulfill its mission. The moving parts, the synergy, the systems analysis that you have to apply. Find it a different and maybe applied version of the subject of philosophy that's very rewarding for me. I mentioned that the size of the North Harris County Community College District, now called Lone Star Community College, with intentionality, because I know many people will be having questions in their mind. Well, how can somebody who comes from Alpena Community College with its 2,000 student body successfully lead Grand Rapids Community College, a much larger institution? But my response to that question is twofold, really. There are some aspects of leadership that don't matter with regard to size. Things like integrity, vision, and communication. Well, it's more complex in a bigger organization, but the desire behind it, empathy and understanding, connection with the community. Those things happen every day at community colleges, large and small. Again, you have to learn how to do them differently on a larger scale, but they're the same basic qualities. And the other fact, of course, is that I do have extensive experience in a system that grew to be quite sizable, understand some of the complexities that you get into with a community college of the size of Grand Rapids. So let's move on. The four questions that you stated, Donna, before us. And those are the first two, those are the second two, and then I structured the presentation to respond to each one of those successively. And once I'm finished with a few remarks on those four questions, I'd sort of like to tie it together with a portrayal of what I perceive to be my strong suits as a leader, and some mention of the things where I'm not so good, but I need some help. And that's the great thing about teamwork, where you're not so good in one area. You depend upon people who are more skilled and more advanced, more adept at things that you're not personally adept at doing. So continuous and quality improvement. This is something that we learned from the Japanese starting in the 80s when they started beating up on us in the car industry and electronics industry. It was a welcome addition to the American way of doing business and manufacturing, and spread, of course, to the service economy in big ways. And I've seen a number of instances on it, and I won't get into the technical differences of one version versus another. I think that you have a splendid set of mechanisms within GRCC to emphasize continuous quality improvement, beginning with the AQIP, the award, Vanguard Award that you've gotten for carrying that out to a high level. Instead, I'd like to just speak to the motivations in a very low-key, common-sense way. Let's ask ourselves the question, and what is it that motivates people to want to improve? And what can we do at a college, an organization like this, to strengthen those motivations for improvement? And then whatever technique is applied or whatever mechanisms and programs and structures, to me that's secondary. If you don't have the basic motivation, in place and understood and not only preached but walked every day, then continuous quality improvement is not going to happen. Well, my basic idea about managing is to bring out the best in people who are around me. And I would contrast that with being on people about their failings. I've never seen anybody be punished or hectored into truly desiring to improve. Have you? And it just doesn't, human beings just don't work that way. And except in those very rare cases where somebody's performance is such that there needs to be separation from the organization, which unfortunately occasionally happens, I sort of view the employees as everybody's got a best and everybody's got a not so good. Finding what the best is in you and you and you, and encouraging that, cultivating that, praising it, appreciating it, that's what's going to give you the inner drive, the inner aspiration to achieve excellence. So whatever other members of the organization can do to identify the best and bring it out in people is going to be much, much more powerful than focusing on people's negatives. And where I might have a negative, somebody else, as I just mentioned, is going to be able to pick up with greater strength as we appreciate one another as team members. Recognition and appreciation of people is important both in informal ways, the handwritten note, shaking somebody's hand who's done a good job, and the formal ways. We have a Lumberjack of the Month award at Alpena Community College that I just awarded to just an outstanding member of our computer programming staff who, she's not even been with us for a year, but has served so many people so well. Yesterday I was calling the faculty back and greeting the employees for the start of the school. I called her up. It was a great pleasure to tell the whole organization what a great job she had done, how she had shown so brightly, so quickly in the organization. And, we have to do those kinds of things. I'm sure they're carried on here at GRCC as well. I'd also be interested in GRCC's history of the discipline known as appreciative inquiry. And without going into a lot of detail, I would be interested to find out whether that's a way of capturing the best in an organization, sort of consolidating its strengths, and then making the most of them. As you can tell, I'm a positive person. I'm optimistic. I think shining light on the good and reinforcing the good has a way of taking care of a lot of the stuff that's not so good. So. To me, the motivation for continuous quality improvement has to become with a very firm understanding of those how we all are as humans and what we respond to. I think we respond more strongly to the healthy pride in oneself and the esteem of one's peers often than we do to other motivations. And that's particularly true of idealistic organizations like community colleges, hospitals, others that really try to serve human beings in the best way possible. So community of high-level learners. The word community, I think, is the key here. I think we have to start with something I strongly believe in, that human beings are innately curious and have a love of learning. It's the responsibility of a community college to bring that out. And I also I think that the community of learners that takes place is just tremendously enhanced by the emphasis that you so correctly place on diversity. Diversity in all different forms. I'm just really impressed by I know it's the D in the Raiders value system. I visited the Office of Advancement of Diversity Programming this morning. In fact, I have the list of speakers that you've lined up this fall. The more we can get a hold of the issues of diversity, this is great stuff. The more we can understand one another, create that community. Negatively speaking, sometimes there are misunderstandings that have to be dealt with and understood and overcome. Trustee Hanlon, I think she is here, her work and the work of the other trustees to heal the effects of racism. Sometimes you have to come to grips with the bad stuff before you can get on to the really good stuff. So I commend you for that work. I also think that it's important in the community advancement of the community of learners and the continuous quality improvement of the learning here at Grand Rapids Community College to use information as well as we can to see how we're doing and how our students are doing and how we are doing as professionals in our learning, to make the best use of those assessments, and then also to apply them to the strategic planning and allocation of resources and program visioning that takes place as the college moves forward. I have never seen a community college or looked closely at a community college that handles the information and uses it and applies it as well as you do. So one of my tremendous motivations in appealing to you for this position and my excitement about the possibility of this job would be to participate with a high-performing organization that does this so well and could always do it better. The general learning outcomes, the 7 or 8 of them that you have, learned a little bit more today about how you're tracking your student performance. I also think the professional development that takes place on this campus for faculty and staff is great. The Learning Academy vacancy really goes back to a question that I asked in my semifinalist interview. One of the members of the search team was Lori Foster, and I'd done a little research on her background, learned that she was a facilitator for the Learning Academy. One of my questions for her was, well, how could the work of the Learning Academy, what challenge was most important for it to overcome? And she looked right at me and she said, fill the vacancy in the director position. And so I got that message, and I think having direction for the internal professional development arm of the organization would be a big part of the picture that the people who work here exemplify lifelong learning, as well as it being something that we try to inculcate in our students. So those are some of the ideas I have on that question. Catalyst for economic recovery. You're doing great things here. Mentioned several times the really good news that I learned about last week about Priceline.com, making the decision to locate, and as I've been here, understood the role that GRCC has had in helping the decision makers of that business move here. In fact, at the dinner last night with the trustees, I asked a little bit about that, and Kathy Mullen said, well, the training has already taken place. And this morning I had an opportunity to peek in on that training as I had the tour from John and Paula, and it was great. It was just wonderful to see how quickly, how responsibly GRCC could move to be part of the overall appeal of the city of Grand Rapids to cause that decision to happen. So that's great. Looks like I'm getting a time signal. Is it 5?
Couple minutes to wrap.
Couple minutes, okay. So the Center for Michigan is an Ann Arbor think tank that I've worked with in Alpena, and what they say is talent is more important than anything else. And they define talent as a combination of innate ability plus the kind of thing that we can provide for our students, developing that talent with knowledge and skills. Being good-natured, visible in the community is a big part of a president's job. The living logo, that's my new mantra of the college. And so that you hear correctly and you lead in the listening of what the needs are and try to carry them out. The right programs, learning outcomes, response time, I've already touched on. Employee engagement is very important for everybody to have the mission in mind. You've got a great mission. The consensus on the worthiness of projects, bringing people into an environment where they can express what they think about projects prior to the decision makers making those decisions. Visibility, approachability, some of the other themes, courtesy and empathy. Courtesy is a really big deal. You can call it the Southern touch of Olin, Joynton, but and I understand that, especially up in Alpena, things are done a little bit more bluntly, but still, there's always room for treating people with respect and with empathy. So that matters a lot to me. I think it helps the organization flow. What do I consider strong suits in my own ability and history? Vision. This is a vision for Alpena Community College that I was assigned to write by the Board of Trustees, and it's working very well. Integrity. In a small town like Alpena, everybody knows everything about everybody else, so you don't get away with anything. And every time I'm tempted to do, as we all are, to do something a little bit shady, well, I imagine how that would look written up on the front page of the newspaper, and that's no. The credibility of the leader is extremely important. It's a bedrock and the foundation of everything else. Humility. Well, here you see the president sitting on his sofa, drinking a martini, and he's got a suckling pig, and the staff aide is coming in, and he says, "I'm almost done for the day. Are the adjuncts ready to carry me out to my car?" So this is what you don't want to get into as a college president. the bad example. In the vein of humility, it's I'm not the most creative idea generator. I'm good at logical analysis. But again, surrounding one of my hiring philosophies, I have two of them actually. Hire people that are smarter than you are, especially in these areas where you're not so smart. And the other one is hire people who want my job. That makes them work harder and make me work harder too. So. Accountability. One of your great industrial leaders here, Max Dupree of Herman Miller, has written a number of management books that I admire. You want to be the kind of person who embraces accountability. That's something that I do. Focus and clarity. I can't understand this representation of your performance excellence model. Maybe it was somebody else who could teach me. But this is something, an example of something I may get in trouble and lose all chance of getting this job now. But, and understand it's good-natured, but there's a little bit of work to be done here. And communication. There are different forms of communication that need to take place. I've got a lot of experience communicating with different kinds of audiences. So I guess my time's up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Joynton. We know the time goes really fast, and you've hit a lot of good issues here. We have an opportunity now, about 35 minutes, to pose some questions to Dr. Joynton. And I think all of you, when you came in, got an index card, and we'd certainly encourage you to ask them. There's some people helping me, so if you can just pass them to the side. And I think Rick Olson and I will be kind of also, he has a mic, and we'll be taking turns kind of asking Dr. Joynton these questions. But some were turned in earlier, and I'll pose the first one for you here. Would you please describe one illustration of your leadership style in a college setting in which you feel you were particularly successful? Could you also describe an instance where your approach was not successful and what you learned from that experience?
Mm-hmm. Okay. One success and one not so great success. Well, let's start with a success first. I would count as one of the most important things that's happened at Alpena Community College since my arrival, and I can't take credit for it, but I was articulating it from day one, is a climate of trust. The culture, campus culture, and trust has lots of different ways to go. It ties into accountability, which I just mentioned, has to do with giving people permission to take well-researched and well-intentioned risks that line up with the mission of the organization. And when they fail, as they will, I mean, people who are trying the kinds of things they should be trying will fail at a much higher rate than people who aren't trying to do anything. When they fail, honoring the risks that they took. I'll give you a specific example. Recently, we have an educational talent search TRIO program operating on our campus, which reaches out to high school students, tries to give them the picture of going to college, and it is aimed at at-risk students primarily. We've got a great director who has career nights that are aimed at students, giving them hope and ideas about what they could be. Again, growing their goals and their dreams way beyond where they might be at this, at the beginning. So he had a great idea of rescheduling what had been a succession of evening programs into one big Saturday morning program. And he got very good attendance at the evening programs. He had asked around and had an idea of how to do it differently and might even be better. It flopped miserably. Okay? And instead of shaming him or punishing him or anything of that kind or hiding what he had done, I publicly commended him at a Board of Trustees meeting for trying something, for giving the information, for being candid and forthcoming, and learning from the lesson. And he's going to, I saw him the other day, he's going to figure it out better next time. Maybe go back to the old way or some other modification. So honoring people for taking risks in order to grow a culture of trust within an organization would be something that's very important to me. And the trust also, of course, goes back to the integrity value, being credible, being a person of your word, being honest, candid, whenever you can be, and then when you can't be completely candid, when there are considerations of confidentiality, honoring people in that way. One thing that did not work so well, I guess I would go back to communications. One of my last slides was about communication, and we all learn from our mistakes, don't we? I had a kind of a rocky time getting started at ACC. First time to be a president, first time to be in Michigan, brand new community, lots of things going on. And I made some errors in communicating with the trustees, let some things slip out in the newspapers before I told them about it, and also a few times talked to a group of trustees about something that I didn't tell all the trustees about. And boy, I was talked to about that, and I listened. And fortunately, we've developed a much better communication system. Every Friday, I email the trustees the main things that I've been working on during the week that's ending, and the main things that I intend to focus on in the week coming up. I also have something I call the media contact alert. And every time I speak with a member of the press, I interact that way. I immediately let the trustees know about it so that they hear it from me before they hear it out in the media. So mistakes made, but you're venturing lots of things in that situation, and you got to learn from your mistakes and go on.
We're going to ask the second question, and a lot of good questions have been coming in, and I hope we can get to as many of them as we possibly can. Here's the second one. Where does fundraising come into play with the president's role?
Well, it's a big part of it. I attended a meeting at Traverse City with the Michigan Community College Association, along with your trustees and some of ours. There was a program, the Foundation of Northwestern Michigan College. One of the things I've said several times today is that the president needs to be the living logo of the college in the community. And again, a learning curve for me personally, learning how to to relate the needs of the college in an inspiring and appealing way to people who have resources, and having the courage and in coming to enjoy, really, asking people what role they would like to play in advancing the college mission. Some specifics, capital outlay funds from the state. This goes to, I think, another asset of a person who's been in Michigan and who has been a chief executive officer in Michigan. Regular contacts with the legislature, familiarity with the bureaucracies and the state offices, which are more important now with term limits than they used to be, and comfortable and frequent in my communication with the legislators. Eventually got $1.4 million that had been tied up in state capital outlay processes released for improvements, capital improvements at Alpena Community College. Along with that, in the community, I arrived where the college's 50% of that was a community capital campaign that was 2/3 done. And within 4 months, their executive director of our foundation and the foundation board members helped me understand who to approach and how to approach them and the nature of the ask. And as a team, we got it done within 4 months, finished our part of it. And tacked on an additional campaign. I told the community visitors about the technology and the furnishings for the new areas, which we kind of, with inflation, we kind of ran out of money and we needed more. So I went back to the trustees, and we are almost done with that part of the campaign. So I know it's a big part. Grant work also been very successful at Alpena Community College. End-to-end Department of Labor grants, 1.5 million, 1.9 million. Now for expansion of programs there, free training for people in the community. You have to have, again, work with people who have that desire and that encouragement to reach peaks of excellence themselves, cultivate that desire for continuous quality improvement, and wonderful things happen.
Thank you. Rick has the next question.
Dr. Joynton, I have a question from the audience around diversity. Would you share with us your experience with minority communities and tell us about one major community partnership you made happen on behalf of the college with a minority community or group?
Okay. My experience with minority communities is significantly greater in Houston than it has been in Alpena. As you might understand, 98.5% white population in Alpena. And so that, as I said in my letter of application to GRCC, that's a facet of the environment and cultural richness that my family and I enjoyed in Houston that I miss. It would be a motivation for us to move to Grand Rapids and enjoy the complexity and diversity. You know, I'm trying to think of a large-scale, big, impressive partnership, but I'm going to just use an humble one. Remember, humility is important. As a faculty member, I was very honored to develop a relationship with an African-American student in one of my philosophy classes. And he approached me and asked me if I would be the faculty sponsor of the Black Cultural Awareness Association that he wanted to start. And I said, wow, why are you coming to me? And you have other options? And he said, well, somehow, things are clicking with us. And so I worked as a faculty sponsor with that group. And it's a partnership between the faculty and the students within the organization. That's the example that I would always remember in terms of partnerships.
Okay, I have the next question. As the demographics continue to change both nationally and locally, what do you see as GRC's role in educating students for a global society and world?
Okay. Well, the global awareness and the demographic change are the two parts of that that are important to connect together. I think in Michigan, there's been a particularly tough time to deal, we all know, with the changes in the global economy. It's the only state in the union not yet to recover from the pre-9/11 levels of economic activity. And one of the demographic changes that is apparent in Alpena and apparent in the state is the fact that many talented people, in that sense that I had up there just a moment ago, the people who have innate ability and that's been refined by educational processes, are leaving the state. So I think we have a flat population in the state, but the youth are leaving, especially the most talented and well-educated youth. That's the demographic change that I think that a community college could play the biggest role in reversing. How do we take talented people who are tempted to leave Michigan and give them incentives to remain in the state, and how can they be productive and successful in the state? That's one of those big questions that the community college, along with civic organizations and local government, state government, have to work together to find. The basic approaches that I've seen successful and would want to take here as well as in Alpena would be learning how to work smarter, not necessarily harder, but smarter, understanding niche markets, really jumping into the STEM fields, the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, because we have a deficit, as the World is Flat book says. We are losing ground in comparison to educating people compared to countries like India and China. And that requires more encouragement, more confidence by students to enter those very difficult and challenging fields and make the success happen. So I think a greater population of youth who are highly trained, especially in those STEM fields, contributing to the growth of technology, health industries in this area would be the formula for success, where GRCC would play a big role.
Well, I think that logically leads into our next questions, which are two questions around technology that I'm going to kind of combine for you. Should GRCC be a leader or follower in implementing new technologies and sustainable systems in teaching, transportation of our students, and construction of new buildings? What's your experience dealing with technology, and how would, in this area of tight budgets, how do we keep up with those technological advances?
Well, the answer to your first question is both, leader and a follower. And I think that we find ourselves in all kinds of situations being a leader and a follower. The question of being a leader and being on the so-called bleeding edge of technology has to be looked at in terms of how much risk you are willing for the institution to take. A lot of new technologies are shaky, I would use that word. They're unproven. The counterbalance to the excitement of jumping into new technology as quickly as we can is the solemn responsibility we have to our taxpayers to engage in good stewardship of the resources, and also the students who bring their tuition monies, often very hard-won tuition monies, not to squander those resources, but to apply them as responsibly as possible. So I think some kind of mix of some bleeding edge and also being a follower with proven technologies is the formula in response to that question that's, in my experience, proved most successful. I guess my biggest technology project at Alpena Community College is leading the college's transition from a legacy homegrown management information system dated back to 1979 and to purchase of DataTel software and hardware to go along with it, and the long training that it's taken and for staff to adapt and also to operate with both systems at the same time. Maybe you've been to that dance. It's an awkward one, but finally to gravitate to up-to-date technology. Now, the DataTel example is a good combination of we need to do both. ACC adopted Release 19, which was still in the beta phase, but we made an agreement with DataTel to get some extra support. And I think it affected the price that we also got. So there are some things about the Release 19 that were shaky, unproven, not fully developed, more or less in the testing stages. But DataTel, on the follower end of things, is a proven company with a long history of good service to educational institutions. And so we weren't, setting up something with a fly-by-night. Another example would be open source learning software for online instruction, and something I've been very interested in. The Sakai project with University of Michigan and I think Cal Berkeley, MIT, 4 major universities jumping into learning support software for online instruction that's free. Okay, that sounds pretty exciting compared to Blackboard. The fees escalating. But the other part of that is that when you jump into those new and experimental technologies, your need for additional staff at your college to provide support that the company, you're not dealing with a company that's going to provide that, and to work out the bugs in an experimental system, that rises. So somewhere those lines cross. I've been every 3 or 4 months, I talk to our IT folks and say, well, have the lines crossed yet? Because I think it's really cool to be part of the open source movement, but you also have to be responsible not to throw something at students and faculty and staff that's not going to be reliable. I hope that's a satisfactory it's intended as a balanced answer.
I have 2 questions that I'm also going to combine, and they both have to do with millage. We have recently had 2 failed millage elections, presumably because we could not convince voters outside the city limits that we were the community's college. What could you do to help change that perception? And then the second question, can you give us an example of how you would go about passing a millage for GRCC?
Well, does it have to be hypothetical? Maybe some of you know that Alpena Community College was successful in its bid for renewal and increase of our millage a couple of weeks ago. So I'll change the hypothetical into an actual, and proud of that accomplishment. And I realize there's some things you can do in a small town that don't necessarily apply, can't be automatically scaled up to a large urban area. But the basics that we applied were demonstrating our value to the community day in, day out, having the president and other members of the staff be very visible in the community. There's no set of techniques you can apply to election or election campaign that can overcome that basic day in, day out service of and reputation of the college to the community. And you are very well grounded in that basics. I believe in this case you have done all that stuff very, very well. The selection of people to lead the campaign is very important. We're very fortunate in having two highly regarded members of our Association of Lifelong Learners, a couple that was especially able, that's our association of retirees and lifelong learning. We were able to reach an audience that is typically skeptical of millages, because their children are grown and they're out of the school system. Why should I pay taxes for the college? But they were getting enough value from the community college in terms of the other programs, the wellness center, the library, the lecture series, the concert series, that they perceived what an important role the college played in the community. And so another thing we promised them was no phone banks. We're not going to annoy you at dinner time with robocalls, but in fact we are going to rely upon friends spreading the word to friends, and that thank God proved to be successful. You have to be very sensitive, especially during hard economic times, about certain even continuing existing taxes, much less asking people to restore the amounts that have been eroded by Headley legislation. But in this case, it was successful. I think in Grand Rapids area, you were spread over a larger area. As I looked at the precinct reports and heard about yours, it is true that both for us and for you, that the farther you get away from the central campus, the more precincts voted against you. And so that speaks to the ability of the college to embrace a large community. One of the questions in, I believe it was the faculty forum, was if you have a college with several satellite campuses, how do you avoid the frequent problem that you see, and sometimes it's subjective, sometimes it's objective, of diminishing the resources that the satellite campuses get compared to the main campus. So if there was a single thing that I would have in mind, perhaps if GRCC should wish to try again, would be perhaps making sure that the resources in all the outreach centers and the more outlying communities are as up to speed as they possibly can be, as prepared to serve people as well as possible as your magnificent main campus. It's up to the trustees whether and when to try again. And certainly the next president's job is going to be to work with them, listen very carefully to their sense of the question of whether, and if so, the timing.
We have several good questions left, and I'm sure, just apologies to the audience, we're not going to get to all of them in 10 minutes that we have left. But the next pair of questions that I have is, how involved do you see yourself being in the daily operation of GRCC should you be president, and how does that fit with our policy governance situation here at the college?
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, the answer to the first question is very. And I think it's a responsibility of the president to be visible, to walk around, to be accessible, to have that open door, that authentic open door. I asked the faculty, would it concern you if I was passing by a hall and heard something really interesting in a lecture and came into the classroom and listened for a while? And got a good response to that. In fact, they wanted the next president to do more of that. The president has a schedule that is very complicated, many demands on that person's time. And but I still think it's very important to have those informal interactions in that way, as well as the formal opportunities for interaction with the staff members. Something that, every day as I wrestle with my own schedule, I have to ask myself all the emails and reports that have to be done and meetings that have to be attended. How long has it been since I've just gone around and ask people how they're doing? So it's something I would be mindful of. Now, how does it relate to policy governance? It's the central idea of policy governance, which GRCC practices as a high level of artfulness, something that is an attraction point for this position for me, and something that Alpena Community College Board has does not have consensus to pursue. The central idea is that the board members set the ends of the college, your 7 ends, beginning with community outreach, and developmental education, and the others, flexible learning, lifelong learning, workforce development, and then sets up limitations for the president, executive limitations, I believe is what they're called, the linkages and the governance processes. But underneath all that structure is the idea the board sets the goals or the ends and holds the president accountable for how those ends are reached within the appropriate limitations. I would very much like to do that as far as connecting it with visibility on campus. I would apply the same philosophy, and I'm known as a delegator to people entrusted with their own particular responsibilities on campus. I do not agree with the idea of a president standing over the shoulder of people and telling them how to do. I think the golden rule applies here. If I'm really excited about an opportunity where I know what the ends are and I have a lot of liberty and discretion to carry out those ends, so employees would want the same consideration and trust. And that's, speaking of things at Alpena Community College, I would say there has been a major shift since I've been there in people being told in kind of minute detail by upper-level administrators how to conduct their operations, to being liberated into figuring out the best way themselves, having that buy-in and personal enthusiasm and personal pride in their work, and the appropriate monitoring and correction, if necessary, from the administrators. So I see policy governance as a gift from the board to the president that the president gives in turn to the staff, would be the summation of that.
Okay, the next question deals with emergency preparedness. Describe a college-wide crisis you've dealt with. What strategies allowed you to handle it successfully? And what, if you could, would you have done differently?
Well, let's see. I will go back to my experience at Montgomery College in Houston, where even though it was suburban and fairly affluent suburbs, crime was much more of an issue there than it is in Alpena, where people still keep their keys in their cars while they go into the store. People don't lock their doors at night, and it's a very safe community, something that as a father and a husband I'm very grateful for. But at Montgomery College, we had a tragic incident. A female student came into conversation with a drifter who came on campus, a seductive person who took her off campus, raped her, and killed her. And her body was not found for some month afterwards. So that was a tragic event that heightened us all to the level of security that we needed to maintain on the college campus. So with the other administrators, went through a process of awareness training. Student services was a big part of talking to students about not getting sucked into that kind of danger, and also dealing with the family. I mean, the summation of it was the family was recognized as a college that had done what it could. A suburban campus has its inherent dangers. There's a process of healing with the family that ended up with a memorial garden being established in her honor. And the family were endowed a scholarship in the name of the daughter that they had lost. So not losing touch with a bereaved family in that situation, but drawing them into the process and going through the stages of grief with them was a big part. Just one other thing on security. You told some of the your police chief, I'm sorry I'm blanking on the name, but this last week at Alpena Community College we conducted 2 days of exercises with sheriffs, city police, and state police simulating active shooter of the kind that scenarios that we saw in Virginia Tech and Northern Illinois. And the emergency management team of the college, 7 or 8 of us, were part of those exercises. It was truly an awesome experience to hear the guns go off. Of course, they were blanks, and hear the shouting and the screaming of the wounded, scenario after scenario after scenario, designed to get us used to those kinds of events, which no campus is immune from. It's the first of several. Next iteration, we will have our nursing faculty and students and our criminal justice faculty and students involved in that training. And repeating that training is a big part of preparation. I don't know if that's been done here, but it was certainly a turning point and a milestone for Alpena Community College.
Okay, I think we're pretty much out of time here. I'm going to give you the last 3 or 4 minutes if you have any concluding remarks that you'd like to leave us with, and we'll give you that opportunity right now.
Well, I will be very brief here. I just want to convey my enthusiasm and everything that I've read about and studied ever since coming here, and more intensely, starting with last night and being on your campus today, my enthusiasm for the position. I would be thrilled, as I say up here, to be your next leader. And again, if it's somebody else, my compliments to a high-performing organization that any president would be proud to be a part of. And you're doing great work here. But I sure hope it's the one that I'm the one that will be able to work with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's give Dr. Joynton a hand.